Hello, everyone. We welcome you to another episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your hosts, Bernhard, Guenther, and my wife, Laura Matsue. This episode's topic is about finding your soul purpose. Now, that's a big one, and that's a topic many people ask us about, approach us with, and we work with also with clients. And it's a big one because there are many misconceptions, many different angles to look at it all from. And we go deeper into this topic over the next 2 hours. Again, first hour for the public, second hour for members. If you want to have access to the second hour of all podcasts, go to veilofreality.com and sign up to the membership. But before we dive a bit deeper into this topic, we have a little announcement to make.
Yeah, so we're going to be running another round of our Time of Transition Embodied Soul Awakening 8-week group coaching program due to popular demand. And that's going to start on December 15th, 2020. And what we do in those programs is basically we guide you through experiential and practical exercises that help you work on the things that we talk about in the podcast. So our podcast is really us talking about these topics, and the group coaching is us actually doing the work. And it is really important that we gather together and we do this inner work, especially when times are like this and the shadows are really high and there's chaos in the world. Like, this is the best time to do your inner work. It really is. I know it's hard. Every day I sit down for meditation, I'm like, oh my God, this kind of stuff that I have to process. But it's really important we do this kind of work now. And this is really the awakening process, is really gaining the practical tools that we can in order to create the conscious world and the conscious communities that our soul desires to be in. So if you're interested in joining us, once again, it starts on December 15th. It's an amazing way to start out the new year, really giving a gift to yourself of this kind of deep soul work. And it's limited to 25 people. And you can join us by going to www.awakenapply.com. So that's, again, awakenapply.com. And we hope to see some of you there.
Yeah, because this program, like the first one, always is only by application. And just to share a little bit, the really context of this program is really that we combine the inner and the outer work. It's really about the holistic fourfold approach of inner work on a physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual level, but also understanding the outer world, the matrix forces, the divine forces in context of the time of transition we're going in right now, and really helping you, as we will discuss more in this podcast as well, in this episode, to align you more with your own unique soul purpose.
Yeah, we really cover all sorts of different categories. We do in-depth meditation, we do trauma work, we do shadow work. We also learn about these larger cosmic forces and the evolution of consciousness. So we really just give you all the tools that we've used in our own I was going to say hero's journey. It is kind of a hero's journey, but healing journeys, because we really want people to be living the life of their greatest potential. Like, now is actually the time for you to activate your soul purpose. I've seen this in a lot of people I've done astrology readings for lately, which is also something we get into the course, is your soul purpose is very much guided by the stars. It doesn't mean you're dictated by that, but you could find a lot of insight when you start to understand yourself through your astrology chart. And so that's what we're hoping to do, is really activate the soul purpose of many people. And many people are losing their jobs, and many people are losing relationships. And a lot of changes are happening in your life. And I think it was Changyan Trungpa who said, chaos is the birth of change. And that's really what's happening here, is we're seeing a new world we're entering. Who knows what that world is going to look like, because it's really up to us to create that. So that's what we're trying to make here.
Right. Exactly. So let's dive into this episode of finding your soul purpose. Well, that's a biggie. Yeah. I think it's best to start off with actually asking not only what is your soul purpose, but what is the soul? That's really, I think, the word soul or purpose is being thrown around carelessly, just like the word love. and can be misabused or abused or mistaken for many other things, which is not that, which I've also realized and found out in my own life as well. You could, as you mentioned before, you can really look at soul purpose, look at it from different levels or different lenses. The astrology lens, especially evolutionary astrology, which is your expertise, we definitely want to get into that as well. But maybe start off generally speaking, because when you think of it, your ultimate soul purpose, when you think of your whole existence, all successive incarnations, lifetimes, is really about self-realization, of a successive incarnations and awakening what Sri Aurobindo would call the psychic being or your true soul being, and bring it to the front and become a conscious transducer for divine will, which then results in full, even not disintegration, but making the ego personality a servant to the divine. It's like the ego is not in charge anymore, not in control. It understands the interrelationship of it all. It truly experiences oneness and brings the soul to the front, this psychic being, and that becomes then a transducer of divine will. And it's a whole different level of experience, but ultimately your soul, quote unquote, soul purpose is unification with the divine, yoga.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also really important to note that the ego tends to struggle with the desires of the soul, especially early on in our journey. Like that's the biggest battle to overcome. And this shows up in many different ways in people's lives, like, the constant thinking, the monkey mind, as they say, that's a function of the ego. And it's not necessarily that the mind is bad or that part of us is bad. It's just that it's exaggerated. And the truth is the ego is not supposed to be running the show. It's exhausted. So we have this part of ourselves that's trying to manage our lives, and it's not meant to do that. The soul is actually meant to do that. So it's really important we grow the soul and grow our connection to the soul in order to really live more fulfilling lives. That's really what it comes down to. Like when we're living from our soul, then we're aligning with the things that we truly and deeply desire, and not the conditioning of our early childhood or our environment or culture, and that can be painful. Like it can be really painful for us to realize that we've been living a life that wasn't ours. And that's usually how people live their lives, is they try and fit themselves into society and what their parents or their peers or the world expects of them. But the soul has a completely different agenda most of the time. So it's really important to know that there's also aligning with your soul purpose. It sounds really nice, but there's actually some necessary pain involved with doing that. And that's what I've discovered personally. Likewise,
there's a struggle. I mean, you hit the nail on the head about the struggle within, right? Between the ego and the voice of the soul being, the psychic being, is very dim. Like Sri Aurobindo talked about, it's behind the heart. I believe in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, it's also behind the heart.
And it's also locked up, like there's chains energetically around it until you do intentional work to open that. Yeah. So that's why also I see it in the world all the time. Majority of people don't know how to love. And majority of people, when they do know how to love, they're terrified as well. And the capacity of the soul and the heart to love is actually immense. Like people have maybe experienced it on psychedelics or, like as in different altered states. But that's really, the soul is a very compassionate and present being, and that's what and as you see in the world, there's a lack of that because people have their heart armored.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about this first before we talk about what the soul is not, because what I've noticed also within myself, I've been mistaking all kinds of various things, impressions, feelings, desires, or ambitions, wants and needs, whatnot, with my soul being or soul purpose, when that was in fact coming from what Sri Aurobindo would call the desire soul. It's like the ego hijacked aspect of that and, kind of morphs it for its own agenda, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's kind of camouflaging the charlatan, literally.
Yeah.
So I want to just read this little quote from Sri Aurobindo about the desire soul, which is not the true soul. There is in front in man a heart of vital emotions similar to the animals, if more vigorously developed. Its emotions are governed by egoistic passion, blind instinctive affections, and the play of life impulses with their imperfections, perversions, often sordid degradations, hard besieged and given over to lusts, desires, wharves, intense and fierce demands, or little greeds and mean pettiness of an obscure and fallen life force and debased by its slavery to any and every impulse. This mixture of the emotive heart and the sensational hungering vital creates in man a false soul of desire. It is this that is the crude and dangerous element with which the reason rightly distrusts and feels a need to control, even though the actual control, or rather coercion, it succeeds in establishing over our raw and insistent vital nature remains always very uncertain and deceptive.
Yeah, there's also a certain sense of like clinging to this experience of the soul, like, and that's not the nature of the soul. Like, definitely the soul has certain lessons that it wants to learn in certain lifetimes. And I feel personally that's different for everyone, although on a higher level, we're here to realize who we are and why we came here. We're actually here to realize the self, but if we're trying to control or we're trying to manipulate something, or we really feel this like thirst or hunger for something, that's usually coming from another aspect of ourselves.
I think it can also relate to which I've also, when you are very identified with what you do, right? Because that's the biggest misconception, which I also found out the quote unquote hard way, so to speak, because soul purpose is not your soul, or you speak about soul purpose, is not what you do.
No,
it's not identified. Your true soul being is not identified what it is doing. It is not your work, your profession, your vocation, or any of that, right? Yeah. It's not a career. It's not a job. That is not your soul purpose. Not even your vision, or like being an artist, musician. People think this is not your soul purpose.
Yeah,
it can express itself through that, but the moment you identify with it, then the soul desire, the charlatan, has taken over. Yeah,
exactly. Like you can, see it through the lens of astrology. Like you have these certain themes that the soul is looking to learn and develop on a deep level, which is seen through Pluto and the North Node. And, how that manifests can be so many different ways. So if you have a North Node in Leo, for instance, or the 5th house, that's the house of creativity, of self-expression, of learning how to, actually really develop a healthy ego and be and creatively express that ego. So many different ways on how that can play out, so many different ways. So, I don't believe that there's like any specific career that you can say that someone should be doing. There's just certain gifts that their soul is looking to explore and understand. And there's so many different pathways you could take to finding that,
Yeah. Before we go, I just like to also quote Shri Aurobindo now about what the true soul is, the psychic being, before we go deeper into, more the specifics about it, so to speak. So he writes, the true soul, the psychic being, is a silent inmost being of which very few are even aware. For if all have a soul, few are conscious of their true soul or feel its direct impulse. There dwells a little spark of the divine which supports the obscure mass of our nature, and around it grows the psychic being, the formed soul, or the real man within us, the real I, so to speak, the real true self. It is as this psychic being in him grows, and the movements of the heart reflect the divinations and impulsions, that man becomes more and more aware of his soul, ceases to be a superior animal, and awakening to glimpses of the Godhead within him, admits more and more its intimations of a deeper life and consciousness and an impulse towards things divine. It is one of the decisive moments of the integral yoga when the psychic being, liberated, brought out from the veil to the front, can pour the full flood of its divinations, seeings, and impulsions on the mind, life, and body of man, and begin to prepare the upbuilding of divinity in the earthly nature. That's very interesting, because what he mentioned here, also what you just mentioned, is about the necessity to grow the soul. Right, the soul grows within a lifetime, over lifetimes, and Guenther also in his work talked about the necessity to grow the soul because it's not fully developed in us or not fully brought to the front, and we think we are fully connected. I think that's a big misconception. As Sri Aurobindo said, you have to have a certain level of being already and worked on yourself or cleared yourself, and also a certain stillness of mind, getting out of the mental confusion, as you mentioned before, to really listen this very dim voice of your true soul being.
Yeah. And also, as I mentioned before, growing the soul is painful because the ego is very impulsive. It wants what it wants. It acts out old patterns very mechanically. So, to grow the soul, sometimes we have to sit in some pretty uncomfortable feelings because we want to act out and we want to say something and we want to do what we've always done, and it's actually painful to hold back. And that's what I find grows the soul is like our conscience knows one thing and then our ego knows another thing. And when we act from conscience, the ego doesn't get that gratification. And so that's painful, so like the moments, so someone's projecting something on you that has nothing to do with who you are. And you just learn to, sit with the projections and see them for what they are and see that person suffering. Those acts grow the soul because you learn to not act from that impulse, that temporary gratification that the ego is always seeking. And that's very hard. That takes some self-control, actually.
Yeah. And all that reminds me also in a true sense, what you just mentioned, your soul, quote unquote, purpose also draws you out of the comfort zone of your egocentric existence.
Yeah, we should talk about that a little bit because I feel personally, I had some struggles aligning with my soul purpose and some false starts, but maybe you can share your journey first.
Yeah.
When did you become aware of some deeper purpose in your life? And what was your experience trying to answer that call?
That's a good question. I think I also want to put it in context of your true soul being, as Sri Aurobindo and others also talked about, its pure state is joy. It's pure joy, not depending on anything external whatsoever. It's just pure joy. That's it, right? It is. So I think that can be a hint of what your quote soul purpose is, or draws you out of your complacency. And I remember in my personal life, again, listeners maybe know my story a bit, growing up in Germany, being very lonely, in high school, being bullied, not fitting in, being depressed and whatnot. I sought refugee in music. And then late in my life, actually, in my age of 19 or 20, I found playing drums. And I played the drums, and that connected me. I felt something so joyful in my life like I've never felt before. It was I remember the first time I sat on a drum set and started to play the drums, like something else. I felt bliss, like Joseph Campbell, and so I started to follow my bliss, and I thought this is what I wanted. This is my purpose. I want to be a drummer, right? I want to play in bands and make music, and this is my purpose from now. I decided.
Yeah.
And that was my driving force. But this joy that gave it, driven by this joy and fulfillment to something higher, because it was not just I'm going to make money and fame, it was just what it gave me, also emotionally looking back. So that drove me, that was my impulse, or the inspiration to come to Los Angeles to study drums and percussion, go to music school, play in bands and whatnot. And that was a really intense journey, but it brought more stuff up, right? It was very difficult, obviously. And now, looking back in my 20s, I thought this is my purpose, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. But then it actually was just initiation, a start to something else.
Yeah.
And then my glorious dreams never manifested, which also I realized a huge lesson, and that ties into the saying, tell God your plans and he will laugh at you, right? Because I thought this is what I have to do. And I tried all even, manifestation rituals to manifest my music career and whatnot. And my ego got very much involved.
Yeah.
This is what I want, very attached and identified with that.
Yeah.
Right. Until the universe or the divine threw me a curveball, and something through my own suffering, I became more interested, I need to figure myself out. I'm suffering. And I realized through music and playing the music I used to play back then, very hard, heavy, dark music, it was actually my shamanic journey of doing shadow work, and something else emerged. And then I found all of a sudden, years into it, another talent, another purpose, which was my healing hands or body work, which a mentor introduced me to. And I went to massage school and it came easy to me. So there was another talent, a gift I found. I was like, oh, my purpose is now being a healer or whatnot, or a massage therapist. But that was also not it. You know, I already realized it's not about one single thing. I think the trap, looking back, you know, not to get too deep into my personal story, it's not your sole purpose. It's not one single thing.
Yeah.
Right. It can manifest, express itself through various things, and there are different stages which lead you always to something which you can never expect. And I never planned on, you know, consciously where I'm at right now. And there's a saying, you cannot connect the dots looking back.
Yeah.
Right. But now looking back, I see there's some force that has guided me, some sort of like divine guidance, intervention even.
Yeah.
But in the moment, I was also, like you mentioned in the beginning, misinterpreting it because like my soul, something was birthing within me, but then my own wounds, traumas, and ego got involved. And there was a lot of friction and suffering.
Yeah, and it's funny because we actually have, although it's a different placement, we have a similar South Node and North Node trajectory, you know, like, so South Node in Leo, the 5th house, that's all about creative expression. And that's also how my journey started out, is like, I knew very early on, I'm talking about like grade 7, that I was going to be a writer. Like that's extremely young, because I just had a gift and I just knew that I was a very like Leo-like kid, like always wanting to perform and like make people laugh. And then I remember actually very vividly in like grade 7, like we had to write an article, and I was like obsessed with Rolling Stone back then and music magazines and stuff. And I wrote an article exactly the style of Rolling Stone magazine when I was in grade 7. And like everyone was like, oh my God, how did you do that? And I know through other placements in my astrology chart, I had this ability to read writing and then emulate it. Like I could read like Oscar Wilde and write the way he does, or other people, you know. So I knew very early on in life I wanted to be a writer. And then also similar to you, I was really into music. So I just combined the two. I was like, okay, I'm going to write about music. You know, I wrote about all sorts of different things. But I noticed too, because, you know, depending on which way you want to look at it, I either have North Node in 11th house or North Node in 12th house. But the main journey of that is basically learning how to use your creative gifts to serve humanity in some way.
That's North Node in Aquarius.
Yeah, exactly. Or even with the 12th house, it's a more spiritual placement. But so, you know, that's how I started out from age, like, I don't know, like 16 until my mid 20s. I was working as a music journalist and, you know, in the entertainment industry, which I've talked about quite a bit, and had a significant amount of trauma from being in that kind of industry. And then at a certain point, I just got so traumatized, I lost the ability to write for a few years. So I had to go through my own healing crisis. And that was around the time of my Saturn return. It wasn't that I wasn't writing. Actually, I was very close to not writing at all and not even reading at all. And this is someone, like, I grew up like reading books and writing. So it was very weird for me. And then, you know, and then I found yoga and meditation around that time. Because I had to, similar to you, I reached a certain level of suffering with my creativity that I was like, holy shit, this like needs to be figured out. I mean, I almost died because I was so addicted to several different drugs. So I had to go through a really deep healing crisis with that. And then I had to figure myself out because, as I've mentioned on other podcasts, the mental health industry and the psychiatric industry was not helping me. It was not giving me what I needed. I actually needed spirituality. That was the main thing. That was the main thing that was missing.
Can I ask you just real quick?
Yeah.
When you were working as a journalist, music in your teenage years, early 20s, and you do this already professionally, did you think, okay, this is my purpose, this is what I want to do? And like, did kind of like the ego come in, like, I'm going to be famous with this?
Yeah, because then the wound with, like, you know, a Leo South Node is if you didn't actually have parents who like saw you and appreciated you for your gifts, then you're seeking, you need that validation. It's like, oh, if I'm on television or if I'm famous, I'll get that validation. But then it was interesting, like whenever I would show my parents like magazines that I got printed in, it was very young too. I was like a prodigy, they'd never like, they would either like criticize me or they'd just be like whatever about it. Maybe one of my parents, my dad was a little bit more supportive because he was an artist himself, but I never got that validation I was looking for. And I truly thought, I was like, before I turn 20, I'm going to be rich and famous. I also thought, I was like obsessed with the Beat Generation writers. I was like, I'm going to be this like tortured artist and I'm going to be like so famous and like everyone's going to think I'm the coolest. Like that was like, my ego was identified with being a tortured writer, basically.
Can I share some? Because I can relate to that. You know, it's this mixture again, like there's a passion, the true gift, right, of doing that and the joy of doing it. Some of my, as a drummer and musician, it was like this just pure joy for expression and creativity, but it was also driven by my wounding because I got bullied in school and I had in my mind, I'm just going to show everyone. You know, the typical fuck you all. You know, I'm going to make it as a rock star and show you all. And because I'm, you know, to show you that I'm better than you. Right? It came from this like almost revenge weird thing.
Exactly. And that's the same thing as me. Like I grew up in a very small town, you know, that kind of town where like you go back and like nothing's ever changed, similar to actually where you grew up, I'm sure. You know, and so like that was a huge step for even me to just move out of this small town and be living in big cities and be living in this life, you know. And then also, you know, but basically just to finish my story, you know, I found yoga and meditation. And from the day that I found yoga, I was like, holy shit, this is the only thing that's making me feel better. And I was doing it every single day, basically. Like I was like so disciplined with it, even in the beginning, because I needed to feel better. It was the only thing that was working, you know. And then through doing that, you know, I actually started doing tarot and astrology readings on my Instagram. And then that led to like different kinds of life coaching. And then, you know, I started studying trauma therapy modalities because people were coming to me for astrology readings and they were like dealing with really big issues. And I had to figure it out myself too. A lot of the tools that I actually teach people are because I've had to figure it out myself, basically. So I fell into yoga and meditation, and then I started spiritual bypassing, you know, like it was like I did yoga and meditated every single day, but if I didn't do it, my life was like a mess. That's a huge sign that you're spiritual bypassing, by the way. I heard an analogy. The guy from Internal Family Systems Therapy talks about how people use the yoga and meditation to stay above the flames. So there's the flames, that's your life experience, that's your pain, your suffering, your trauma. And then yoga and meditation can make you just kind of float above it, but the flames are still there. So yeah, just to finish up the story, like I started studying trauma therapy modalities, really getting into the deeper psychological work, getting into somatic meditation, which is a more embodied meditation, which is making you go into the flames. And then that leads us to basically what work we're doing now, you know, like showing people that you have all the tools to heal yourself. Like it's really about trying to find and access the true self, which is really, I found, the center of the journey.
And healing, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just remind me, healing yourself in that context means actually to bring forth your soul, right? Your true self, your quote unquote soul purpose. That's the whole process. You need to dismantle or, you know, get rid of the armor and all the conditioning, programming, and wounding to bring the soul to the front.
Exactly. And there's all sorts of like body work that needs to be done. You also have to learn how to understand your own nervous system, and all sorts of different things need to be done on a somatic, physical level in order to bring the soul forward. Because if you're in a state of fear or you're checked out, then like you're not going to be able to access the soul because you're in an animal state, or you're not even in your body, you know? So these are all interrelated. So a lot of people think like, okay, like I just listened to some new age meditations about, you know, seeing the light in everyone and I'm going to activate the soul. And even though that might make you feel good temporarily, you know, in order to really embody that soul, it's a painful process. And I just know that from my own life experience. Like I've had to like struggle with my ego time and time again, every single day. Actually, I have to, because my ego mind, you know, has its own agenda, and the things that my soul needs to do for my life's work is very different. And it's not, and even though I feel very aligned with my soul purpose, I also have to say it's super not easy as well.
No, I mean, that's, you know, listening to your story and so reflecting on mine and from other people we've also worked with, you know, it's interesting when we truly like we want to live my soul purpose, and, you know, almost be careful what you ask for, because it leads you into areas where there is suffering. Right. The dark night of the soul and all of that. These, like you mentioned, it's necessary to like confront that to get you closer to who you truly are. So there's a paradox again of the necessity of suffering to bring you closer to your soul purpose or to your true being and engage in the work. And I also might add, you know, it also depends on the level of being of a successive incarnations. You know, like I think people like you were very much drawn myself to spiritual esoteric work. So the soul has been also ripened over lifetimes. Right. I think that's also with enlightened masters, you know, from the past and whatnot. They were just ripe in this lifetime of the successive incarnation to experience full omniscient enlightenment, all these things. Right. So there's different levels of being, but the soul purpose is always driving, like, it's not interested in, you know, your soul couldn't care less about what you think is success, what you identify yourself. It's also about experience and soul lessons where karma comes in, right? And I think that's why evolutionary astrology, which I learned a lot from you as well, even in more depth, can be extremely insightful. You know, it's never the whole picture, but, you know, especially then if you understand your north node, south node placements, even Pluto as well, or Chiron, to a degree, can give great insights about, you know, the deeper lessons of this current incarnation, or where it came from, so to speak. Yeah,
Pluto in the astrology chart basically represents the soul, and maybe the reason I'm so drawn to it is because I have some Pluto aspects to my major planets. You know, so it's basically, when you look at your Pluto, you're looking at something that your soul has been learning for multiple lifetimes. So it's incredibly insightful to look at your Pluto placement, because this is something you've been working on for a while. And then how you got those needs met in past lifetimes is seen by the South Node and the direction. And it's also that area you tend to fall back upon is your South Node. And then you want to really gain mastery over your South Node, both the shadows and its gifts, so that you can anchor into your North Node in this lifetime. And if you look to your North Node, you know, because these are hypothetical points of the moon, it actually gives you a sense of emotional fulfillment. It may be difficult. It may be like very foreign territory to you, because you have to understand that this is something that new to you, you know, that you've not explored yet, at least in a few lifetimes, you know. So that's really the way to look. And then with Chiron's a really interesting thing in the chart, because it can be both the main thing that wounds us, and it can also be the gifts
that's a that we have. Wounded healer, right?
Yes, it's the journey of the wounded healer. So, you know, the Chiron contains the potential for us to be the healer, the mentor, you know, where Chiron lies in your chart. You have those skills. But in order to access those skills, you have to get over the part of yourself that identifies with your pain and complains about it. And you really need to become compassionate to your pain and the needs of all beings. So, you know, so with Chiron, you got to look at, like, where's the area of my life which causes me the most suffering? And do I turn my back on facing that? Do I turn my back on my own gifts? You know, or do I, do I go through my own hero's journey with this pain, and do I try and understand it? Like, there's really an expansion of consciousness that needs to happen with Chiron. We also need to, you know, be a bit of a seeker. We also need to learn how to surrender. You know, there's really this like journey of like the victim who learns how to heal themselves, who becomes the healer for others. And then what I've learned recently is there's another journey that that Chiron wants to go on. So then once you learn how to be of service to others, and you kind of find your purpose, and you find that inner teacher, and you learn how to use your kind of learning how to heal yourself, and you teach that to others, then it can also, you see this with gurus, they can get on power trips, they can be messiah complex, they can get into pride, they can become the persecutor again. So we have to go through multiple journeys with our Chiron. It's that's what makes it Chiron. It's almost like the wound that never really ends up completely healing itself, but still we can use it to become a catalyst for others. And I've learned a lot through my own Chiron, because my Chiron's in the 12th house. And like, I had to suffer with, like, you know, isolation for a really long time in my life. Like, it was extremely painful at times. And I'm talking about like the deepest soul pain other than like grieving, it was very on par with that. And it was also something I had to learn. I had to learn how to be alone, in order to connect to the divine, actually. That's really what I came down to. But then there's a part of myself that started to identify like, okay, I'm going to be this like meditation teacher. And I started to identify with the gift, right? Yeah. And then again, I had to go through my own process and like learn how to like not identify with it. I'm just playing a role. I'm just, there for whoever needs me, So I've gone through several journeys with my Chiron in the 12th house. I've also had to struggle with my own commitment to spirituality in the sense. And I'm not talking about just doing the rote behavior of like meditating and doing yoga. I'm talking about being like, I'm completely committed to whatever God has in store for me. And that's the only thing that matters. And basically that's where I am now.
Yeah, exactly. That reminds me again how the ego can hijack this whole process, and what we mentioned or you talked about at the beginning as well. That's just like this friction within, and you don't really, what's the ego, what's the soul? And then in generally, like the ego in generally likes to hijack spiritual experiences for its own purpose, own control, right? That's
automatically. Like it's
the sincerity is so needed, the integrity.
Yeah,
that work.
Can I just touch on that? So that happens so automatically. So if you have like, when you finish meditation, you're like, oh, that was a good meditation. Or like, oh, like I feel like I'm a higher state of consciousness. It happens so automatically until you start just catching it is the first step. So catching the awareness, be like, when you want to post a Facebook update or like, be like, oh my God, like I had this amazing spiritual experience. All of that is the ego hijacking.
Feeding
like,
off.
Yeah, the spiritual practice should very much be like chop wood, carry water. Like you just do it and then it's done and then that's it. And also abandon any hope of that it's going to make you a better person or it's going to make your life easier or it doesn't happen. Like that's another way the ego hijacks it. Is like, I'm going to meditate so I can get this, or I'm going to do a spiritual practice so I can get this.
Yeah, the reward thing.
Exactly. Or like my life is going to get better. I'm going to meet my twin flame. Yeah. You just got to literally let all that go. Like just imagine your life is going to stay exactly the same whether you meditate or not, and then you're on the path, basically. Exactly.
So let's translate this into soul purpose, because your soul purpose, again, is nothing you do. It's not your job, your career, your vocation. It's not your vision, art, or anything project you do identify with. It's not a definition or identification. So the moment you think, oh, my job, my purpose is to be a healer, my purpose is to be a writer, all of this, that's when the ego hijacks the whole process.
Yeah.
Right? You become identified with a thing. Like it's very limited because, again, soul purpose is beyond one single thing.
Yeah.
As we experience, it's very fluid, very organic. And the ego, it's very, because the ego is also the mental process. It likes to grasp and identify, right? And then also, like you mentioned, ego, the pride can come in the superiority and the feeling special.
Yes.
Right? Like this is also the idea that if you have the feeling, I see this in many people, that and I used to have the idea that your soul purpose needs to be something grandiose, something big, something, service to others, and like, this like, social climbing thing almost, right? That makes you stand out. But that's not so. Like your soul purpose can manifest itself, in what we would think as very simple thing in everyday life. So it's once again you notice the ego creeps in or has been hijacked when you identify with a soul purpose, and it makes you feel special. You feel special, you feel pride, and even very important where it comes, you feel superior, you feel better than others, because of what you do, or this is my big purpose, and you're nothing, and all these things.
You're only setting yourself up for more pain, on the long run, because really when you're being of service to others, you also have to not expect applause or, like you can't even expect appreciation. That's really truly being of service to others, is you expect nothing in return. You don't even want their respect. Like you're just doing it because it's your role and you're there to help them, and that's it. Like you're only doing it. And also you're doing it to grow your soul. And this is also like what I experienced too, you know, like in my own purpose, coaching others, like I'm just doing this because I want to give back to everything that God or the divine has given to me, basically.
But also in context, service to others, not falling into the martyr complex and just giving without, you know, an exchange on that level, and also without being, you know, there needs to be a sincere asking, which I also want to talk about more in some, maybe in the second hour, because it ties into the topic of wanderers and all of that, and the deeper meaning of service to others. You have to respect universal law, only give when it's asked for. You cannot push information. Actually, the service to others can come from a very egotistical perspective, because it makes you feel better. Oh, I'm of service. Or using as a distraction, you're trying to quote unquote help others as a distraction from your own process, and distracting from helping yourself, right?
Exactly.
And I also want to mention that we see this a lot in the pop spiritual new age community, especially when people, it's a big red flag for me, people, whoever identifies themselves as a starseed, light worker, healer, shaman, wanderer, you know, I mean, these identifications right away, it's like a big red flag, but there may be attributes that these people have, these talents, but the moment they identify themselves as such, it's already like, for me, you know, that's not, you don't, it's a red flag, as simple. Like I would, you know, like we doing work what could be described light work, whatever. I would never identify as a light worker. Even in my work as a integrative body worker and doing healing work on people on all levels for over 20 years, I never identified as a healer. Like people say, you're such an amazing healer, Bernhard, but I never took on this identification, because the moment I think that I'm doing the healing, the matrix has me, so to speak.
Yeah, I can relate, like, because like the whole indigo child thing, you know, that I relate to a lot of the traits they describe in indigo children, right? Like, and I get it. I get where it's coming from, but that's also not like, once you start to really connect to the self, the true self, all of that falls away, because you know that all of these labels you could attach to yourself, that's just like, it's such a passing thing too. Are you always a starseed? Are you always an indigo child? No, sometimes you're a fucking terrible person. That's the truth.
Just a human.
Yeah, you're a human being. And that's, to me, like, that's why the somatic work, the embodiment work was really like a game changer for me, because it really allowed me to be in my humanity. And the moment you identify as a healer, all of the traits of someone who's not a healer, also, you can no longer be those things because you've identified as that. So that's the issue, is you start to identify with the light and ignore the shadow. And you can call yourself whatever you want, you know, but the moment that you start to say, like, even people like who call themselves like a spiritual teacher or whatever, I really hope you're enlightened, because if you have a bad day, or you are jealous or angry or just having a really shitty day, then the moment that you get knocked off that pedestal. So it's actually really better to identify as a human being who's having a spiritual experience, you know, than to identify with the spiritual experiences in itself.
Yeah. And it's fine. It's also important. We need language, and, you know, even to, when we do work, present ourselves to share, like, I'm doing this, I'm that, you know, even our work, we are teachers in our regard, you know?
Yeah.
But it's not about identifying with it.
Yeah.
It's not putting it into a box and especially feeding off of that and all of that. And also, I can also relate, you know, the concept of wanderer or the renegades who incarnated here for specific mission profile. I can totally see myself in that as well. I've written articles about it, but I'm not identified with it. I don't create a personality around it.
Yeah, like even the role of like the bodhisattva, like it's funny, I actually went through my own journey with that, because there's different stages of Buddhism. There's a Hinayana, which is really about stilling the mind, you know, gaining knowledge of your mind. And it's really a very personal journey. And then the next stage is a Mahayana, where you really dedicate your practice and all the spiritual knowledge you've gained to be of service to others selflessly. And I didn't want to do that. Like, I was reading these books at my retreat, and I was like, I don't want to dedicate my life to being of service to others. But then I found that I don't even have a choice. It's almost like I made that choice in another lifetime to do that. And it carried over into this lifetime.
I think that ties into, which I also want to, again, we have more time in the second hour. You know, the concept of wanderers, I wrote a whole essay on it based on the raw material. Very interesting more higher quality channel material. But it ties into the idea of the bodhisattva, like that a higher developed soul has voluntarily incarnated into 3D human experience to be of service, but through the veil of forgetting, it needs to remember its mission, quote unquote, so to speak, and then it can easily get lost in the 3D life again, and also interfered with by other forces, the matrix forces, intersecting with the soul trajectory. That ties into love bite scenarios and all of that, which we'll definitely get more into
and then
the
timeline,
hour.
changing your own timeline trajectory.
Exactly, matrix trauma installment programs.
Yeah.
But I want to just mention real quick this, speaking of soul purpose, again, that's not a definition in itself, nothing to identify with because it's such a fluid process, by Marshall V. N. Summers. And he writes, purpose is something you will understand as you climb higher and higher on the mountain of life, the more you progress in life, right? As you gain a greater vantage point, you will understand more of the journey itself by looking behind and by increasingly able to anticipate what is up ahead. Purpose is realized by taking the journey, not by establishing a favorable or fascinating explanation or a definition for oneself. Purpose is not a justification. It does not compensate for anything. Purpose is something that is waiting for you to discover. You can only discover it by taking the journey, by following the way, by learning as you go and gaining the greater perspective and understanding that one acquires as one matures on the way of knowledge. Knowledge, in this case, gnosis, to really answer the call, which also reminds me what you mentioned before of the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell. The hero's journey itself is like the soul evolution going through different stages. And as you mentioned, it's cycles within cycles within cycles. You can even see the whole soul journey of successive lifetimes until full enlightenment as a hero's journey. Or there's a hero's journey within a lifetime.
For sure. Yeah.
Right?
If you go through all the different houses in astrology science,
that's a hero's journey right there.
That's the evolution.
It's all in cycles.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to tell listeners, so what on the very practical of how can you just sense that, there's the soul is calling, there's this, your purpose is calling you. And one thing, what I mentioned before, understanding that the true state of the soul being, the psychic being, is pure joy, right? So, and that ties into what Joseph Campbell said, is also follow your bliss. That's a call to adventure. Like I mentioned in my instance of playing drums, there's something like, oh my God, something that excites you so much, gives you so much joy, not just a fleeting moment of just emotional high, but something that excites you so that you want to pursue it without, it's almost like an innocence of a child, doing something without expectations, without reward, without getting anything from it, nothing external, but for the pure joy of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And I found that really early on in life, like I was always wanting to be in plays. I had like a puppet show set up in my backyard. I was always like creatively expressing myself. It was just so natural and so organic to me. And it wasn't just like, lots of children are creative, but I mean, I was like just so much into just creating stuff, making stuff up, So you see there's a natural quality and inclination towards where your gifts are. I think even early on in life, they start to show themselves, And also, we gotta decondition ourselves to a lot of things in order to discover that. Because with me, I always thought that I didn't really think, even though I made money off of it, it was still in my mind like, oh, you can't be a writer or you can't do this because, it doesn't make money or whatever. I had my own beliefs around being creative and like what that meant, So that's what I had to decondition myself of in order to explore that, because then that's what started my own path doing what I do now, which I really write about spiritual topics. I started writing a book, and thought I was going to be like a spiritual writer or something. So my ego was once again hijacking it. And so you see that even though I don't identify myself as a writer, but really underlying it was like wanting to creatively express myself. That's the underlying
purpose.
And then
the creative expression. expression.
Exactly. And then you see that because I have Pluto in the 5th house. So that's all about creative expression. That's what my soul wants to learn and know. And it has been going on for multiple lifetimes, And then I had to align that. Basically, it wasn't about what I want to write about or whatever that I is. It's what is useful to humanity. That's really what I had to learn and that helped me put my ego aside. So I was like, that's what helped me when I was working with others. People were coming to me with problems and I was like, I don't, you need to go see a therapist. And then they kept coming to me. So I was like, okay, I got to figure something out. I got to figure out how I can help these people.
Yeah. So that reminds me, so before we end the first hour, just to kind of recap, so the ultimate soul purpose, again, is union with the divine, the full self-realization with pure aspiration and surrender to the divine without bargaining, desires, attachment, craving, grasping, hope, or fear. Just this pure giving yourself to the divine, to God.
Yeah.
And it doesn't need to be anything, your soul, but if you think your soul purpose is a thing you do or needs to be some big thing you identify with, then the ego comes in, right?
Yeah.
Some like yourself, especially when you identify your self-image gets identified.
Yeah, like when I identified as a writer or
exactly.
as a meditation teacher.
Me, I'm a drummer in this band.
Exactly.
Then it becomes intermixed with your vital desires, ego, and then also it can be easily you can be more interfered with, hijacked by occult hostile forces without you being aware of it, and distract you more from your true soul trajectory, which we'll go into more depth in the second hour. But it's also important to mention, like you pointed out beautifully with astrology, that your soul purpose can express itself through various areas, through your work, vocation, gifts, and talents, and it can change through a lifetime, as we have seen. Again, what I've seen in my life is like having this hope and faith, and you never know where it's leading to, your quote unquote purpose. Like I didn't, like in my 20s, as I mentioned, I thought my purpose being this and this, then it changed in the 30s, then it changed in my 40s, and it was not consciously planned. It's just something opened up the more I removed what is in the way, right?
Yeah, and I also just want to touch on the ego doesn't also have to appear as self-aggrandizing behavior. It can also appear as self-diminishment, and that's another function of the ego. So like for a long time, I actually really enjoy working with people one-on-one in a therapeutic context, but I was very self-diminishing about that. I was like, oh no, like I don't know how to do this. That's what I see a lot in people is a self-diminishing behavior as well, and being like, oh, I need to do this and this and this to do this and this and this, or I'm too old.
It's like the Matrix program. Or ties also the core wound, core belief many people have
of unworthiness.
I'm not good enough program, or false humility.
Yes, exactly. So
that's very important. Okay, so in the second hour, I definitely want to get more into this topic we touched upon, wanderers and occult interferences. The hostile forces, how they can distract us, and we'll look a bit more deeper into the wanderers topic from the raw material, which I wrote a whole article about it. And so if you're not already a member and want to have access to the second hour, you can sign up at veilofreality.com, become a member, which will give you access to all the second hour of all podcasts, and also will give you access to the private membership forum on my website.
Yeah, and once again, we are starting our next group program, Embodied Soul Awakening, December 15th till February. And we're going to go through, the fundamentals of self-work, the fourfold approach. So physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual, and really giving you some techniques to work through any wounds or core beliefs that you have. And this is the most holistic program I've really seen offered. And I'm not saying that from an ego perspective. I'm just saying that this is very different to the usual self-work program. I'm really covering all bases. So if you want the practical tools to find your soul purpose or to work through things to make you more aligned with that soul purpose, and we'd really love for you to join us. And this is also our own purpose, is working with groups and our life works and getting out of our own comfort zone. So we're really looking forward to seeing some of you guys there, and we'll see you in the second hour.
Yeah, beautiful. And again, it's limited to 25 people and by application only. And you can apply at awakenapply.com. See you guys on the other side.